How would you like to own a business that you were completely redundant in? Today's podcast is part 2 of the series titled Building a Scalable Business That Doesn't Involve You. This episode is making yourself redundant in your business. To get notified of upcoming videos, hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. And please be sure to share this video with someone else who you think would get value out of it. Hello listeners, hello viewers, welcome back to the Sideshow Podcast. You're joining us today for episode 2 of the series that I'm conducting with my series co-host Justin Smith from Work Management Tools. Justin, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Mate, so we are here today as part of the Building a Scalable Business That Does Not Involve You series that we've conducted. We are conducting episode 1 for you guys that missed it. Go check that out because we've sort of designed this entire series in a manner that where the following episode will lead on from the previous. So in the first episode, we were discussing where to start in relation to business systems. And in this episode, we're talking about, okay, well, how do we start building redundancy into things that we're doing? How do we create processes within the business which frees up our own time or frees up our team members' time so they can be more focused within their sweet spot. So this is kind of where the rubber hits the road with processes and checklists, because it really builds, first of all, it can make you redundant as the business owner, which essentially is a very appealing thing for most people, or more to the point, makes you redundant in areas of the business where your time is not best spent. And you see it all the time, as a business owner, especially in the early days when you're kind of doing everything. You're not good at everything. You're good at a few of the things, but there are things that you don't want to be doing. And so that is the point where you go, okay, first of all, I understand that there are people out there that can do this a lot better than myself. Second of all, I want to make sure that people, when they come on board, they are doing things to my standard or what I want done, or they are delivering on the certain things that we need to make this an effective outcome. And third of all, okay, I need to document this and make sure that all the instructions are crystal clear, so that when they do come on board, they're having the best possible. They're equipped with basically the understanding of how to do these things, and we're not just throwing them to the wolves. I will say, in this instance, I have been in the situation where I've done the latter. I have hired people. I've given them no instructions. I've given them very little equipping into how to deliver the job to the standard that I want, if at all. And as a result, they haven't been able to do it. I have inevitably basically resolved that they are idiots and that they are not very good at what they do, and I've fired them. And then on reflection, I've looked back and thought, well, actually, I'm the idiot. I didn't equip them properly. I didn't give them any chance whatsoever to succeed in this role. I'm a clown. Leadership 101, step it up. And that's basically where, we've made a huge segue within the business. And that was a defining point for the business, understanding that, if you want people to do what you expect, you need to show them how to do it.
There's some really brilliant, wonderful literature out there around the system that you give your staff to run in. And sometimes, and by default, it's actually really hard to do. So by default, we tend to build systems that are almost like we set people up to lose. And it's not that hard to tweak it a bit to set people up to win. And just the results that come out of that are really fantastic, and it's much different. And it's a body of work that's really excited me.
It's really empowering for the team member. I mean, we work in the marketing, digital and marketing space, and there's a lot of things that have to happen in order to get projects delivered on the right way. And it's very, when people come into our business, they're blown away by the structure they're given, because it's empowering for them to understand, well, okay, well, I know what I need to do. I just need to go and follow these checklists, or I need to do these things, right? And they know it helps them understand when they're on track. Alternatively, they're in situations where they're told, oh, this is the outcome, go and do it. And whatever the steps are to get there, just make sure they get done, And I've seen it. I've seen it in real time, and I've got the feedback from team members that have been in that situation. It's not a good experience for them, because they never really understand if they're on track. And so when you get to the point where you're like, well, I want I want to reward success. I want to remunerate team members based on, say, KPIs or whatever it might be. Like having those things defined and helping people understand, well, these are the things you need to do, and if you do, you hit your KPI. Then that's an empowering thing for them because they know they're on the right track. But if they don't know, it's a very jaded experience. So I can't encourage that enough. That is a leadership obstacle that you very likely need to overcome. But once you do, it does make things very easy for your team and yourself.
Yep.
So Justin, we're making ourselves redundant in our business using checklists and SOPs. Let's talk about this because, well, let's scale it back. Let's look at the very common scenario of pretty much every business on the planet where there's just a million things to do. There's a million departments. Well, there's not a million departments. There's a handful of departments, but all those departments have things that need to be done within them. And when we are in a business that may be in its infancy, it's very often the case that we are doing all of those things and very likely not very well, but what can you expect? You can't just, for example, remove the finance department from your business and say, well, I don't like doing that, so I'm not going to send any invoices. It has to be done. So the point, I suppose, that we're trying to make here in making yourself redundant or making team members redundant from doing things is, well, you need to define what these things are. And probably tying back to the last episode, Justin, where you said, okay, well, and again, I'm open to your feedback here, but I would imagine it's going to be the same thing where we're like, okay, well, let's look at where the biggest bottlenecks are at the moment, which are coming as a result of people not having capacity, or me or whoever not really knowing how to do this thing. And then say, okay, well, let's get some process around this so that we can get it documented, and then we can bring people on that do know how to do it, or we can train people on how to do it, or whatever it is. Over to you.
Yeah, so I think we're probably talking about this two different ways. So one way is if we already have the team members that can do that task, that are appropriate for doing that task, and in one case when we don't. But in both cases, the starting point is clarity. Really, the clarity is the key word for all of this. So we talked in the last episode about starting to build processes, or I often call them workflows once they're kind of fully built out. Building workflows for the first thing. And then over time, you'll add more. And eventually we have a workflow for each piece of the work that we expect to have done until eventually we hit the tipping point of everything that is the main work is defined. There'll be little bits and pieces and extras, and that's fine. Usually we'll chuck them in like an ad hoc type task list. But the main parts of all the work is defined. And that helps us to, you mentioned before, have team members doing the things that they are best at, that they're really good at and are going to do a really good job of. As we create this definition, we can start to split things apart. So, okay, this bit is here and this bit is here, rather than just all being like some sort of big bundle of like, here's finance work, go do finance work, figure out what that is. By having things defined, we can be a little bit clearer about who we assign it to and how it's separated, who needs to help the other person out with this thing. So it just becomes a lot more manageable. And then once we have things kind of clearly defined, because we've done the work of figuring out what the work is and what the steps are for that work, we can start to figure out who should be doing it. So if you've got the existing team members, that's often pretty straightforward. It's, okay, look, you're really great at this. Let's have you doing all of that. Also, this person needs your help at these points in time because that's part of the process there. Here's how you find out about when you need to do it. So it's all part of the workflows. The other side of it is if you don't have people for that particular task. So for example, you have a team member right now, or maybe you're doing it yourself, you're doing something that doesn't really work or doesn't fit your skill set. So we use the back office example of maybe it's like invoicing. It's just not your thing, or maybe like writing proposals. It's just not your thing. So once we have that defined as, okay, this is a separate piece of work, who are we going to get to do it? Okay, that's not me. And actually no one in the team that we have right now is going to be really great at this. So we're probably looking for someone new or someone external. And there's three options. Yeah, well, actually there's four. The fourth option is learn how to do it yourself, which can be good. Sometimes a bit cheaper in money, although I would generally suggest that people get some training just to really shortcut the amount of time it'll take, but it will still take a chunk of time. But assuming that's not an option, which it often isn't, there's three options. So one is hire an expert. Second one is hire someone who is cheaper or outsourcing. And the third one is get some sort of managed service so you might be familiar with Matt's business. So if you need marketing, get someone like Matt to do it for you. And there are pros and cons of each of those, which I can dive into unless you've got other feedback on that.
No. So I would say, yeah, I agree. I agree with all those. And yeah, just be careful with the number 4 there, doing it yourself, because that, like, very often, like, we're not trying to put more things on your plate. What I would encourage you to do in this instance is get real clarity, and just start with yourselves for where to get started, but get real clarity around what you're best at in your business. So there's this whole, like, cliche clickbait kind of stuff we see going around within the trades, and it's like, get off the tools, build a business, get off the tools. But then when we actually practically speak to a lot of our clients, they're like, no. I want to be on the tools. My best strength is managing the guys on the site. It's liaising with the client. What I don't want to be doing is all the other shit. I don't want to be doing my accounts receivable. I don't want to be chasing the invoices. I don't want to be doing the marketing or whatever it might be, right? So get a real understanding and real clarity around, like, where you want to apply your attention within your business. And you can do that same exercise with all your team members, right? So if you've got someone in the office at the moment, maybe you've got an office assistant, and you're essentially dumping everything on her or him, like, define what those things are and define what is their sweet spot. And once you do that, then you say, okay, cool. Well, let's try and offload some of the other things, because you're obviously not being able to do what you're good at to its capacity. So let's try and offload some of these other things. But you can only offload those things once you understand what they are and what the steps are involved in delivering that thing, right? Because otherwise there's no way to hand that off to someone. And so this whole this is like a great exercise for you guys to start forecasting growth within your business. It's exactly what we do. We reverse engineer it from the organizational chart, and we say, right, in 12 months' time, this is our forecasted org chart. This is what it's going to look like in the business. There's going to be this position, this position, this position. What do we need to have in order to equip these people to be able to do this job? What does that look like from a finance point of view for turnover? What does it look like from a process point of view? Like, it's saying, okay, well, if this person's going to be introduced into this job, this job doesn't even exist right now. So what is this job going to look like? And what are the steps they're going to be responsible for? Like, what do they have to actually do? So you got to give, when those people come on board, you got to say, all right, well, here's the things you got to do. And this is what we expect, right? So you've got to give them some sort of boundaries. Again, like, look into the future, because it's very often the case where we just sort of look at where we're currently at, which won't help, doesn't help, has no real, doesn't help you getting to where you need to be, right? So we always try and look to where we want to be, and then we reverse engineer that process, and it makes it a lot easier to do. So what Justin's talking about here is a really useful way for you to forecast growth across many different areas. But essentially, if you understand the things that are happening within the business, you're breaking them down into steps. It means that come the point when the stars are aligned and you can, say, afford to bring a new person in, or you can afford to outsource a certain thing to somebody else, or whatever it might be. Or maybe there's just very obvious lost opportunity cost because somebody is doing something that is not in their sweet spot and it's hurting the business. Like, very often you can hand something off to someone and it can save you a ton of money, or you can hand something off to a technology and it can save a lot of money and streamline things, right? So, but you don't really ever understand that until you define it. And so, when we go through that process in the org structure, like, we look at parts of that organizational, the roles and responsibilities where we can replace that with a tool. It's not always the case. It's actually very, very often it's not the case. But the point is, like, until you define what that is, you're never going to really understand if there's a better way of doing it. And so, like, I would say, like, those things that Justin's mentioned are really important, but it's a really good exercise for you guys to go through within your business, defining what those areas of currently your roles and responsibility are in the business that you want to hand off, or team members, what they're currently doing, how to take things off their plate so they can do what you hired them to do better.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's quite a bit of work in that. Like it's not a quick thing. I kind of skimmed over it pretty quickly there, but I would say to do it, one process at a time. You don't have to do it all at once. And it once you define each process, and it's done. Like you will improve it over time, but you don't have to go back and redo that. So each time you add another bit on, that's like a permanent improvement to your business. And so it does actually build up, slowly but impressively. And you get to a point where you're like, wow, I've got like my whole business defined. I've got some like really real clarity and real systems in place. And so part of that is going to be the steps that we were talking about. I think it was last episode actually, the steps of what to do, and part of that's going to be the how to do it, and that's your SOPs, your manual. So I use ClickUp, so I have both in the same one. Matt uses ClickUp as well. So we have here's what you need to do, and also here's the link to the document to explain how to do it. Particularly useful for new staff, which we're going to talk about a little bit today, and also for existing staff that just need to remember, haven't done this particular job in a while, like what I need to go back and figure out what the steps for that were again.
Yeah, that's an important point as well. Like a lot of these, like Justin said, like SOPs are extremely useful for people, especially when they're starting. And that's a really good thing to, I suppose, define, because like the point of SOPs or of a process, SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedure. Trying not to get jargony, but like essentially it's the how. It's how to do the thing. So this is how we create an invoice in ServiceMate. This is how we send our follow-up emails or whatever it is, right? So it's the how, whereas the checklist is the what. But it's like when Justin said, it's very useful for new people. What you'll inevitably find is, and I do this all the time with my own checklists, like I'll go through the checklist and I'll tick things off because I know how to do them. But if at any point I'm not quite sure, which does happen, like if I want to say, like do something that's quite technical and I'm not really a technical person, like I'll look through and especially when I'm onboarding new team members, I don't really do it a lot these days, but if I have to step in and do certain things, like there are things in there that I need to refer to the process on how to do it because I forget. And because I'm not doing it all the time, if I didn't have that process, like it would take me a long time to try and figure it out over and over again. Whereas because I've got the process there, I can just click on the link and see it. And then I go, that's right. Damn. Okay. No worries. Click that done, move on to the next thing. So what we're talking about here, guys, is helping you free up time. Like there are things that you do within your business which you probably do repetitively over and over again. So there's a very strong chance, and if you take even like if you look at, for example, this is another thing that I've spoken about on the show before. We actively, Justin, try and encourage, and we have processes and programs around helping our team members become the experts in their space, showcase their authority, create content, all this kind of thing. I'm building courses out on this stuff at the moment. Like we're going all in on it, right? What we're essentially doing in this process for businesses is we're answering like questions they may have, right? So we're kind of creating processes for leads here. We're creating SOPs for leads. We're answering questions that they might have so they understand, okay, that's how they do that. Cool. It's the same thing with our business. Like you guys are so used to having these conversations with your clients, and it's probably the same conversations you have over and over and over and over again. There's no reasons why you can't start documenting those conversations and documenting those answers. You might want to call them FAQs. It could be a blog. It could be a number of many different things. It could be a short video you put together that when people come into your ecosystem or when they come to you for a problem, you've already got the answer. And so this is the same thing when we're talking about team members and we're talking about processes. It's answering those problems before they arise, because very often they haven't even considered that as being a problem yet, or they haven't considered that there's a question there. But the fact that you've already answered it for them, it means, okay, cool, they never have to come to you and ask you for it. So yes, it does take time in the early stages to set these things up, but you need to look at the time it saves you in not having to do these things over and over again.
And I think there's an important point in there. Oftentimes when people hear some jargon like SOP or standard operating procedure, they think they need to write like a thesis on each task. And right. I'm really, really against that because I'm thinking about adoption, effectiveness, are the team going to actually use it? And so in my experience, people don't want to read a really long SOP. So the way I tend to do things is dot points. How simple and short can I get this? No extra stuff around the outside. Just here are the exact points that you need to know. And it might be, a certain number of dot points, each one just short, and that might be the whole SOP. I know that there's definitely some templates out there for like, here's the proper way of doing an SOP, and they include a bunch of extra stuff. I'm kind of against that. I think if it's not directly useful to your staff members, then I just think it's fluff. So it doesn't have to be hard.
I completely agree with that, and I would prefer to start with less. And if it's and so the way that we approach it is, if we create an SOP on something, and I give that SOP to a team member, if they can't follow the SOP, then we go back and fix the SOP. If that means putting an extra step in, then we'll do it. Or if it means putting an extra explainer in there or something like expanding it, then we'll do it. But like you said, less is more in this instance, because you don't want to be in a situation where you've got a 30-page document on how to, send a zero invoice. That's ridiculous. Like, it's not that hard. What we actually like to do, Justin, is with most of our SOPs, we give people the option where there's a video there they can watch on how to do it. So someone will record a video on the process, but then there's also steps documented in like bullet points below, or numbers, or whatever it is, or my checklist, or whatever it could be. And the reason we like to do both is because people will respond differently to different types of media, but also like in the first instance, somebody might watch the video and they'll go, oh, okay, that's interesting. That makes sense. Cool. The next time they go back, they're like, I'm not going to sit through this 5-minute video. I just want to read through the bullet points below. Oh, that's these steps. Okay, I remember now. So if you've got them both in the one place, it gives the person that's actually trying to follow that process the option, and if they need to dive deeper into it, they can go watch the video. If they don't need to dive deeper into it, they just follow the steps. It's really quite simple. And it's very often, and the reason I say that is because it ties into what, very much into what you were saying before, especially if someone's new at doing something, they may need more explanation. So the SOP should have that explanation to cater for those people, but it should also break it down into simple steps. So they're like, oh, okay, well, this is the third part. Oh, I missed that part. That's what happened. Damn it. Okay, I'll go back and do that. So, yeah.
And I really recommend videos, like you said, particularly for things like software, where someone who hasn't used it before, it's real hard to explain where a button is. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, it's in the top right-hand corner of the screen. It's just easier to show. And I think videos are nail it for
video.
that. Yeah, exactly.
It does get a little bit tricky, like when you try to implement like video process to, practical jobs out on the site, for example. Like if there's guys, okay, this is, it's not always the easiest thing to record a video on somebody installing a hot water heater or whatever it might be. So, be receptive, I suppose, you guys out there, to where you can and can't use different forms of media. But the point we're trying to make is, and this is my approach, and my whole team knows it, and this is part of our culture. If there's a problem, if someone doesn't understand something, we don't show them how to do it. We fix the process and we give them the process back, and then they follow. If they can't follow the process and get the job done, then we go back and we fix the process again, because I'm not interested in standing over their shoulder and telling them how to do something, because that doesn't solve any of the problems long term. It just solves the problem immediately. So we need to think in that mindset of, how do we make this scalable, and how do we make this process the best it can be, so that we never have to have this issue again. So it's a bit of a paradigm, I suppose, in the way, first of all, we think, and then second of all, the way we operate. And it can, at a glance, when you get started with this, it might seem like it's taking a long time, and it might seem like, well, I could just do this in a third of the time, and you can do it in a third of the time, but you will always be doing it unless you process it out. So spend the time to do it. And this is why Justin says, start with where the bottlenecks are, start with the friction points, spend the time on it. It's worth spending the time on those things, because then you never have to do them again.
Yeah. And there's a concept with like this sort of thing is often called process mapping, that there'll be things that are really worth mapping, those bottlenecks, those really difficult things, but there are ultimately infinite processes. And so as you do it, you'll eventually get to a point where you're like, okay, this is enough. There might be smaller things that happen, once a year or once every couple of years. You're like, well, we just don't need a process around that. But the less of it you've done before, the more likely it is that you have really big things that are really, really valuable to get a process around. And so it's going to be really, really valuable to do those.
Yeah, and you will end up. I mean, if you look at our business, there's hundreds and hundreds like of SOPs. They're everywhere. It doesn't start like that, and in truth, you don't want it to start like that. I'm really against these, programs and experts or whatever that are like, we'll give you all your business systems. Like, I think that's bullshit, because if you don't understand, like, if you haven't created that system, if you haven't created that process, and you're not invested in that actual that process, then essentially you're just following someone else's instructions on how to do something, I've never seen that parlay into, like, practically into another business ever. Yes, the framework conversation I get, and if someone can give you a foundation for an SOP, which you can evolve, fantastic. But the point I'm trying to make is it needs to be yours, right? So someone can give you a process on something, but you still need to make it yours. Like a client of mine, and actually one of my best mates, who's also a client, but he said the other day, I want to, can you just give us your process? Like, can you show me how you do your hiring? And I was like, not really, because it won't mean anything to you unless you read these two books. Because I designed that process out of, like, I created it out of what I learned out of these two books. But if you didn't understand, like, that whole if you didn't understand the concept, if you didn't understand what we were trying to do here, if you didn't understand scorecards, if you didn't understand these things, it would make no sense to someone. And so there's no point in me giving that process to anybody, because until they understand the concepts behind how it got to that, it becomes irrelevant. So this is the thing that you guys are going to have to understand. Like, we need to, you want to be in control of this process evolution journey, because it means that, like, in trying to make yourself redundant, it's very hard for you to palm something off to somebody else that you don't understand yourself. So, like, just get some, and this is where, using Justin and using ClickUp and tools like that is very valuable, because it does bring a layer of transparency into, and simplicity, more to the point, into how this evolves, the evolution of this. It makes it a lot more scalable. So it's probably not necessarily the most important part of the process, but it certainly is a consideration when you're looking at the long-term scalability of what you're trying to evolve here. The thing that is really important, I think, when we're going down this path, Justin, is considering, first and foremost, okay, these are the things I'm currently doing. These are the things I don't want to do. Okay, just defining those. Just jot them down on a bit of paper at the pub, whatever you're doing. Like, just jot them down. It doesn't matter. You don't have to overthink that. These are things I'm currently doing. These are things that I want to offload. And then in making yourself redundant from that, okay, these are the things that I am doing which I don't want to do, and this is how I do those things. These are the steps that I take in order to do that. So is that enough to bring someone in that can do it? Maybe. And to give, I suppose, to qualify that, if it's like say bookkeeping, right, or an accountant, like, these are the steps you're doing. Okay, I'm reconciling my Xero account. I'm following up on invoices. Like, that, there's steps, right? You don't necessarily need to bring a bookkeeper in and say, this is how I want you to reconcile my accounts. Like, they will know how to reconcile your accounts. So just like what Justin was saying, make it simple. It doesn't need, some of these things you don't need to get too granular in. Some of them you just need to document and say, hey, this is what we want to do. Is there any part of this that you don't understand? Show me how you would do this, and I'll see if it's how I've been doing it. Chances are they'll do it better anyway. So, but the point is, document it, right? And so I think that's a really good place to start when we're talking about making yourself redundant within your business.
Yeah, I think there's probably 3 levels there. So there are some tasks where you know all the steps because it's your thing. You've done it. You're good at it. There's some things where you know what the outcomes need to be. You know that the invoices need to be followed up, but you don't necessarily know, the best possible steps. And there are some things that you don't know what needs to be done. So marketing is a big one like this. Like, you might know that you want more customers, but you have no idea what even needs to be done as an intermediate step to make that happen. And there's different ways that you'd approach documentation and different ways you'd approach hiring for each of those. Obviously, the easiest is when you know all the steps. You can write the document yourself first, and then you can probably hire someone, and you can probably, depending on what you want to do, you might be able to hire someone who is cheaper because you can train them a bit. The second one, where you know what needs to be done, you probably hire someone who has some decent skills, and you might write the document. You might write some very basic documentation beforehand to know what you're going to do. You'd probably update it once you hire them because they know more than you about the best way to do it. The third one is where things tend to get tricky. The temptation is to hire an expert who's going to tell me what needs to be done in the business. And for really big businesses, I'd say that works really well. There's a reason why the megacorps in the world fight over the very best people. But I'm going to be a little bit controversial and say that's a bad idea for small businesses. And by small businesses, I mean any business where the person you're hiring is the only person in that department. So it's your only marketing person or it's your only HR person. You might get real lucky and they might be a super self-starter and totally, able to hold themselves to account and all that thing. But that's a lot to ask. And if it's real easy to get into a situation where you just have no ability to manage that person because you don't know what they should be doing. They're telling you that, and there's no other way of checking. So I tend to say that if you're a small business, go with either someone like a cheaper hire, like a more reasonable hire, and then get help as to figuring out what the process should be. That might even be from a consultant or something if you need it, or even like a friend who does that thing, whatever. Or go with a managed service. So someone like Matt who has all the processes, like they're pre-built, and he can just plug into your business and be like, here's how we get this thing done. Here are the steps. I've got the people, I've got the processes, all that is ready. Here are the only things I need from you. It's kind of like pre-built. Whereas if you are a big business, then looking for experts can be fine. But that, to be fair, most small businesses shouldn't need to do much of that kind of unexplored territory type work anyway.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like you don't want to be in a situation where your business is like too heavily leveraged on any one member in the team. And this is one of the reasons why we like to create SOPs as well, because it takes the pressure off that person. Like it's very hard, and you see this all the time. Like you've got somebody that works in a business, they do all the accounts, they do all the invoices following up, whatever. Like when they go on holiday, like everything just grinds to a halt. Like you don't want to put yourself in that situation as a business owner. Like you want to give that person the ability to be able to take a holiday, like they're not robots, and it's a stressful thing, like, and on the flip side of that, some team members will maybe want to do that for like job security and retain that information. And that's a very dangerous position for you as well. So I would want to be in a situation where, you have a culture around documenting process so that, if they want to go on holiday or if they leave or whatever it is, it's not really going to affect, the outcome of that specific role. It just means you're going to plug someone else into that existing process and everything should run smoothly. So build a culture around that, like it's like at a glance, and every business would go through this. I've been through it with team members of my own where they're like, well, no, we don't want to document these things because because I'm protecting my job. But what it's actually done is it's made them impossible to promote, because like we've got this situation where they want to hang on to the process they're doing. They want to hang on to the steps, and I'm like, if you want to hang on to it, fine, but I can't promote you. I can't pay you anymore because you're always just going to be doing this one thing. So until and this is the paradigm shift, and that's like the penny drop moment for a lot of team members where they're like, oh, okay, now I kind of get it, because like you will always do that thing because I can't promote you out of it because you've dug yourself into this little hole here. And so, these are the considerations that you've got to have, and these are the communications that you need to have with your team members if you want to just sort of build this into your organization.
Yep.
So anyway, have we covered off everything here in relation to, I suppose, delegation and making yourself redundant? I think we kind of have.
I think so, yeah. So starting out with figuring out what needs to be done in the business, getting it defined, figuring out which parts either you can't do yourself or you shouldn't be doing yourself, and you also don't have team members for, and then deciding how to go about doing that. Actually, sorry, the middle step there is making sure you have whatever level of process is appropriate ready, and then figuring out how you want to find someone to fill that. I think that's
So
very
in
cool.
so in the first episode, when we were talking about, okay, well, this is where you start with process, right? Like you figure out, okay, well, this is one of our products or services or whatever that, we currently work on, and we've defined that. And then in this episode, we're talking about, okay, well, which part of this process do I not want to do? Or do I not want Justin to do? Or do I not want Sally to do? Like, so let's document those, because once we understand what they are, then we can get someone else to do that, and they can stay in their sweet spot. So this is, guys, what I'm saying. Everything's sort of stemming into each part of each episode here. Like, you've got to understand like the flow and how these things look practically for your business. I'll tell you right now, if you guys go grab a pen and a paper and a cup of coffee and you sit down for an hour, you will be absolutely blown away with what you come up with. Like, if you have focused work on this, like, this is strategy, you should be doing this anyway. But like, if you do have focused time that you put into strategy within your business, it's amazing what you can come up with in a short period of time. It really is. And it's empowering, So I encourage you guys to do that. In reality, a handful of you guys that are watching this or listening to this are going to do it. Most of you, it'll go in one ear out the other. But for those people, what will inevitably happen is, like, there's a right place and a right time for everything. And so what I'm talking to you guys about right now will come at a right place and a right time. And you might hear something and it will go in one ear out the other. Or you might read something in a book and you might go back and read that book 3 years later, and it's like you're reading a completely different book. It's because you're ready at that point in time. So even if you're not necessarily ready for this right now, I would say the fact that you've watched this podcast or you've listened to it, when comes the time that you are ready, you will know exactly where to start, because it will hit you like a sledgehammer at that point in time. I can promise you. So we're going to come back. We're going to wrap this episode up. We're going to come back with the final episode where we're talking about using office project management to streamline operations, what that looks like. So again, a lot of you guys are doing this out in the field with job management, but we're going to talk about, okay, well, let's talk about how we can improve the flow within the office. Okay. So again, Justin, thank you for joining us. Justin, you're from Work Management Tools. There's links to Justin's website. There's links to the free course that he's actually offering up to you guys as SiteShed enthusiasts. So head across to the show notes, search Justin at thesiteshed.com, and you'll be able to pull up his podcast and get access to that course. Thanks again, mate. We'll jump back into the third episode and take it from there.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Hope you enjoyed that episode, folks. Please be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on so you don't miss out on upcoming content. I would love to hear your feedback on this topic, specifically this topic. So please leave us some comments. Let us know what you'd like to hear in upcoming episodes. Let us know some of your experiences in relation to what you've heard today. Thank you, and see you soon.